due to the fact of this man, Brian Flores. So those of you who are probably asking who don't follow sports, before you skip this topic, I think this is important for everybody to know. So let's go through the basic facts of what's going on with Brian Flores. Okay, Brian Flores is an NFL coach. He coached Miami Dolphins. He was fired earlier this year. Uh, People attributed it to a variety of reasons, but it was a suspect firing when it did happen. Brian Flores had led Miami to two winning seasons. A team that typically in the last 25 years has not seen a lot of winning was finally, for once, actually relevant in the playoff conversation. And things were looking up for Miami, but they fired the head coach, basically the guy who was in charge of the regime to some extent, Brian Flores. This week, so that firing took place a few weeks ago, but this week, Brian Flores basically has come back and filed a lawsuit in the NFL, filed a lawsuit in, I believe, one of the courts in New York against the NFL, and he is suing three franchises. I believe it's the Broncos, Giants, and the Dolphins, the team that recently fired him, in practices being racist towards him. So he's basically filing racism against several franchises of the NFL. So that is kind of insane. So obviously those are bold claims, right? So let's kind of unpack that and see like where can we what racism? What like that's a big word. So let's kind of see what he's saying. So those of you that don't know, Brian Flores is an African American coach. That was obvious enough by me saying this. So basically, here's what Flores is alleging. This is all according to Brian Flores' lawsuit. This is the evidence and the structure of his claim that he's using to argue that racism took place against him. So way back in 2019, I believe this is when Brian Flores first got to Miami. According to him, they wanted Flores to purposely lose games. Okay, so like purposely lose games to get a higher draft pick. That's typically what happens in the NFL. The owner, the owner, Stephen Ross of the Miami Dolphins, offered him $100,000 for every game he lost. So this is like tampering charges beyond if this is proven true. So that can see a lot with the Dolphins and all that. That's crazy. That's crazy to think. I believe there's another coach that also came out and confirmed that his team was offering him money to lose. I'm not sure if that is true. If both of those are true. I think both teams have denied both of those charges, so that's interesting. But it is very interesting that is the case. Anyway, so the tampering charges were taking place. The GM was mad after and basically Flores obviously didn't take those charges. And so the general manager was mad after he won games late in the year. And the owner, if proven true, was basically violating tampering rules on many regards. You can't be good. Okay, so that was one of the charges. That isn't really related to racism in itself, but that was one of the things that he wrote. So another thing that Flores talks about in regards to race in this lawsuit is that he alleges that the New York Giants interviewed him for the sake of following the Rooney Rule. Okay, so for those of you that are like, what the hell is the Rooney Rule? Let me explain real quick. The Rooney Rule is a rule that takes place within the NFL, within the head coaching and general manager cycles, right? So like positions of power within franchises. And it basically takes place, and it's basically a rule that says you by like required to interview. I believe it's at least one minority slash person of color candidate for every role, um, for every executive role that a team conducts. So, like, let's say you fire your head coach, you have to at least interview one minority head coach. So it's kind of like you have to interview at least one minority head coach before you come to your decision as to like what it is. So basically, like what it is it's kind of like affirmative action for colleges, except it's like affirmative action for NFL head coaches and GMs. That's kind of how I like to think about it. It's like giving minority head coaches an opportunity to succeed. And yes, this rule on paper works, but it can also be used to, just like a box to check, right? Like Flores is alleging here that the New York Giants just wanted to check off a box for the sake of checking off the box. And so his evidence behind them basically just calling him for an interview because of the Rooney Rule is because the Giants set up a follow-up interview with him for January the 27th, which was fine, right? It's a follow-up interview, you're gonna go interview with them and see if it's a fit, whatever. But they had another guy in mind the whole time, and his evidence with this is that Patriots head coach, Bill Belichick, who's the head coach of another NFL franchise, texted him basically saying, "I heard from Buffalo and the New York Giants that you are the guy." And, Brian Flores was like, "Oh, thanks, coach. Like, congratulations. It's nice hearing from you." And then Brian Flores, to like clear it up, because I guess he got confused. He was like, "This makes no sense." He was like, "Wait, I just want to make sure you're texting. This is, or he's like, this is Brian Flores. You mean to text Brian Dayball?" And he said, and then Bill Belichick basically confirmed it. It was like, "Oh shit, my bad. Yeah, it was for Brian Dayball, or the text was meant for Brian Dayball, who is a white man and who ended up getting the coaching job uh, in New York." And basically, what ended up happening was Dayball got the job in New York on the 23rd, and they already knew that he was going to get the job. This had already been the case, and Flores' interview was scheduled for the 27th. So it was like, oh shit, like what? What? Like so that kind of like, it's like a little sus, right? And they technically checked off the box of interviewing one minority candidate because they scheduled it, but then they came to the conclusion they basically already had their guy in mind at that point. So that's Flores' evidence with that. That is very strong evidence, in my opinion. I think that's the main evidence of his case. And then for suing Denver, he basically said that they acted in a very unprofessional manner. Their executive brass, John Elway, and the rest of his executive team arrived at the interview hungover, an hour late, treated him bad, like unprofessionally, etc., etc. So obviously, all three teams have made a response denying these allegations and making sure that they, cover their ass, I guess, for the time being. I don't necessarily know if they're right. It's innocent until proven guilty. That's the American legal system. So I don't think we can, say whether they were right or wrong. But there is evidence. There is strong evidence that Flores is indeed correct. NFL is also running their own independent investigation, but you know how the NFL is. They're fucking useless, and they've had shit like this happen before, so we'll see what happens. Um, and I guess my thoughts behind this whole thing with Brian Flores is like this, okay? I understand that, like, this has some Colin Kaepernick to it, in that, like, this man is putting his job and his profession on the line to kind of have the greater good and hopefully, investigate hiring practices for, NFL head coaches and the executive staff, you know, more than it is right now. And there is a lot of Colin Kaepernick in that, because Kaepernick had to basically sacrifice his quarterbacking, ability in order to uh, put the message out there that, like, hey, like, people are literally not giving me a job because of the fact that I'm black and I came out and I spoke out about my issues. Obviously, we talked about what went wrong with Colin Kaepernick on an earlier episode of the show. You should go check that out. But there is some similarities. So I think they're going to handle this Flores situation a little different, right? With Kaepernick, it became this huge media thing. It was a huge disaster by the NFL, and basically they tried to combat it by painting Black Lives Matter in the end zone and trying to promote the fact that they were a players first league and they were there to protect their people of color players, etc., etc. So Colin had to come first, right? And Flores is stepping up for the black coaches and coordinators that need to be promoted, and I think he's going to be the face of that, and he's going to be the face of this lawsuit. It's going to be definitely interesting to see how this develops. I'm curious to see how if the NFL has learned something from Colin Kaepernick. I think that's the key here, right? You already had something that happened 10 years in the past. Let's see what they do 10 years in the not even 10 years, like 6 years in the past. So let's see what they do right now, 6 years in the future. And I have a feeling that Flores, if proven right, is going to be um, correct, and there's going to be a lot of. I think it's big for the sake of PR and the sake of the times that we live in. There, I think they're going to have to, accept that Brian Flores is indeed correct, and I think they're going to make some serious changes due to the NFL hiring with the NFL hiring process. I'm not a big fan of the Rooney Rule, like the rule I was suggesting earlier, because I think it's just, like I said, I think it's just a box to check for teams, right? It's like, oh, black guy interviewed, check. Like it's like what, like what? Like I don't know. It creates a weird stigma in my head that like teams are just interviewing African Americans due to the fact that, of their race, not because of their qualifications or the immense, expertise that they may have at the head coaching or uh, GM position. I don't know. The rule sticks kind of weird in my head. I really hope they get rid of it. But also I understand the purpose of the rule because it is an overcorrection due to the fact that there aren't any African American. There's one African American head coach and very few African American executives as well. So obviously want to see more of that considering the league is 80% black and your owners are 100% white. I believe there's not a single black owner. There's not a single black GM, or there is a couple black GMs, and then one black head coach currently employed right now. So that's tough. But it is very like I commend Brian Flores for taking a stand. This is like so much needed. It's very necessary, and I think there are a lot of black coordinators and head coaches and executive staff that very much appreciate the fact that he has taken that stand. And there is only one black head coach that's employed right now, so it is a huge stand. We will see how it all plays out. It's gonna, I guess, play out over the NFL offseason. We'll see if I think teams are gonna probably stay away from Brian Flores for now. I'd be shocked if he was hired within this head coaching cycle. I think they're gonna stay away from him because of the fact that there is a lot of controversy and teams don't like to associate themselves with drama and all of that. So as we saw with Colin Kaepernick, he was not hired. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, the Rooney Rule, Brian Flores is going to be interesting to kind of see how that head coaching cycle develops and changes over time.